Good afternoon, and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online. My name is Drew Clark. I'm CEO and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, where we believe in better broadband, better lives, and super happy to welcome our keynote speaker, Federal Communications Commissioner Jeffrey Starks. Because Commissioner Starks has a prior commitment, we're going to let him tee off this topic, and I'll do those typical introductions I do a little bit later, other than for me to say, welcome. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for making time out of your schedule to address our topic today, which is the future of affordable broadband. And no shortage of topics to talk about on this one topic itself. But let's turn the floor over to you to give us your thoughts on the future of affordable broadband. The floor is yours, Commissioner Starks.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Drew. Thank you to Broadband Breakfast for hosting such a timely event here on a topic that is essential, vital, to ensuring that everyone has access to our modern day of life. And that is, of course, the future of affordable broadband. When the pandemic started, it became very clear to me that there were, of course, two very distinct worlds: those who were connected and able to get access to the healthcare, the jobs, job opportunities, connecting with their loved ones, and then those who fell, of course, and remained sedimented on the wrong side of the digital divide, the disconnected. Affordability was an aspect of the digital divide that I had already been long laser focused on. But when the pandemic hit, I wanted to seize that moment in particular. And so, as I was thinking about what to say here today, I went back and looked at the op-ed that I wrote in the New York Times in March of 2020, just as it was starting to dawn on each of us what this was going to mean. And I outlined, I'd commend it to folks. I outlined many policy points there, but in particular, I drew a spotlight on the issue of affordability, noting that millions of households lack broadband because it was quite simply too expensive. And I noted that, and I'll quote here, no American should go without a connection because of cost, close quote. Those were true words then and true words now. And so to that end, I can't overstate what I view as the importance of the Affordable Connectivity Program, ACP, for the over 23 million American households that relied on that program. It offered them a critical opportunity to get connected and stay connected. Millions of Americans, particularly communities of color, the elderly, military families, were enrolled in ACP. And so this meant that families no longer needed to choose between internet access and the other household essentials. And so I'll never forget when a woman named Deborah from Lake County, Illinois, I was sitting down in this senior citizens affordable housing building, and she asked me truly, with tears in her eyes, if she was going to have to eat less food because when ACP was going to go away, she still knew she needed the internet. And so, like many, she was relying on the internet for almost every aspect of her life, from her family connections to church. And she used that to go to her online church every Sunday, connected with her grandkids, started a business. It just truly, obviously February we have Valentine's Day coming up. She also told me how she joined an online dating community for seniors. But quite simply, to the bigger policy point here, ACP was the most effective program I have ever seen for us in helping low-income Americans get online and stay online. In fact, I believe truly that it was the most successful program we've ever had anywhere in our decades-long bipartisan effort to crack the digital divide. And let me tell you why. Quite simply, ACP's success lies in its universal appeal. If I, here I'm going to list off the top 10 states with ACP enrollees by size: California, New York, Texas, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Illinois. Those are the top 10 states. And so what you'll notice is that's north, south, east, west, all Americans everywhere relying on recognizing how critical this program was in assisting the most vulnerable to get connected. And so when Congress declined to refund ACP, it was a major setback in our efforts to make broadband affordable for all. Last year, as the program was starting to wind down, I made a specific, voyage around the country, crisscrossing it, to stand up for accountability for ACP. I stopped in Washington, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New York, everywhere. And I heard from kitchen tables to town halls about folks, the importance of the affordability of broadband and the access that it gave them. I think, of course, of my friend Ron, a senior citizen and a veteran who used his affordable broadband to set VA appointments, check on the status of his medications. I think of Paul, who told me that broadband access was like air. And so I'll close with a few additional thoughts. Obviously, a lot of the energy right now is with the states that have and are exploring alternative policies to ACP now that ACP has expired. It's also, of course, noteworthy the many ISPs have now had to take back this work and have worked hard on affordability policies there in their own house. I'll be eager to hear from you all, as well as Justin, who will be on a later panel here on feedback on how you all think those developments are going out there in the wild. And finally, one place that I am confident has a bright future in deployment is that of digital navigators. As part of ACP, I was very proud of my Your Home, Your Internet pilot program that was helping to get ACP in public housing. But one of the things that we really found and noted was the investment of digital navigators, trained experts that were helping new subscribers learn how to get online, the digital literacy skills that they needed to best utilize the internet, how to do so safely. And I expect that that will continue, of course, to gather momentum no matter where policy takes us. And so with that, thank you to Broadband Breakfast for the opportunity to talk with you all here. I know this will be an insightful conversation. I'll look forward to, like I said, hearing from you all and hearing the feedback. Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, Commissioner. Take care. Go be well. All right. We are very grateful again for him taking the time. Let's now open it up, and please turn your cameras back on for our panel. And I will introduce our panel properly, I hope. And say again that this event, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, we're coming up just a few weeks from our 5th year anniversary. And how do I know that? Well, because we started on that Friday the 13th in March of 2020, when the pandemic seemed to just close everything down on that one day, right? And we said, well, we're going to bring this community together through this weekly event series, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. It's free to anyone to watch, to participate. The replays of these events are on the same page that you can access, and we'll put in the chat stream as well. And we're able to do this free events through the support of our sponsors. And I want to recognize one of our newer sponsors, Gaia. Gaia is a leading provider of OSS BSS solutions, offering an all-in-one solution for billing, customer relationship management, operations, field service, automation, and more. Founded with a vision to simplify and optimize ISP operations, Gaia empowers providers worldwide to deliver exceptional service and drive growth. Learn more at Gaia.com. That's GAIIA.com. Gaia.com. Thank you again for Gaia and all of our sponsors. Now let's turn to our panel. In addition, of course, to We just heard from Commissioner Jeffrey Starks. I'll introduce Justin Falb at the end, but he is Chief of Staff to Commissioner Starks. We're going to hear first in our panel session now with Representative Tasha Burner. Very excited to have you back, Tasha. We do know you've got to leave 10 minutes early, so we'll make sure to get more of the questions for you earlier. But Tasha and I met last year when she was a panelist on a session we had at the California Broadband Summit, together with the Cal Matters Ideas Festival. And Assemblywoman Berner was first elected to the California State Assembly in November 2018 and reelected for her fourth term last November. She represents the 77th District in California, encompassing Carlsbad, Encinitas, Solana Bay, Del Mar, and the coastal communities of La Jolla, south to Coronado. She was selected by Speaker Robert Rivas to chair the Assembly Communications and Conveyance Committee for this session and serves on higher education, public employment and retirement, utilities and energy, and water, parks, and wildlife. After I introduce the others, we'll turn to you, Assemblywoman Berner. She'll be followed by Yusuf Nekzat. Thank you for joining us. Yusuf serves as legislative director for Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski of Illinois here in Washington. And Yusuf, or I should say, Congresswoman Budzinski handles energy, infrastructure, and labor issues, along with her most recent efforts to reauthorize the Affordable Connectivity Program that we've just heard Commissioner Starks talk about. Prior to Yusuf's time with the Congresswoman, he led legislative affairs for the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Infrastructure, with a particular focus on implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. Yusuf, we need to talk with you about the data centers, nuclear power, and broadband event that's coming up in person in Washington on March 27th. But Yusuf is also a scientist who holds a BS in molecular and cellular biology from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm familiar with Illinois and great fan of the Ilani. All right, let's turn to our third panelist. Will be Drew Garner, Director of Public Policy Engagement at Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. Drew combines research, analysis, and storytelling to educate government officials and the public on broadband issues, and he leads Benton's work in broadband affordability, as well as a deputy director for the state for the Broadband State Education Project. So look forward to hearing more about that. And then again, batting cleanup, kind of full circle moment here. We're going to hear from Justin Falb, who's Chief of Staff and Legal Advisor for Wireline and National Security for Commissioner Jeffrey Starks. Justin served as Associate Bureau Chief in the Wireline Competition Bureau and overseed the Secure and Trusted Communications Network Act implementation. That's the RIP and Replace program. So without any further ado, let's turn to Assemblywoman Berner. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how states can be tackling this problem, as well as the broader federal issue.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Good to see you again. Greetings from California. It is 9 a.m., 9:20 a.m. in California. And so I'm still drinking my coffee and getting up to speed. But when we think about affordability, and I know we've all talked about this, and we're all worried about this. And Commissioner Starks, I think, said it as well. With that, the ACP served 3 million Californians. That was about half the need in California. And so with that going away, we have to really look at a federal administration where we don't know if the Universal Service Fund is going to be re-upped. It's in the courts. We don't know what's going to happen with that. We don't know how Lifeline is going to work. California is one of the few states that has its own Lifeline program. And so when we think about affordability, we are looking at an affordability mandate. And that's why I introduced AB 353. That's currently a spot bill, which we use as a placeholder bill in California, because we, one, want to see what's happening in New York, and two, we want to also give time to speak with all the stakeholders to figure out what's the best path. But I think there's no doubt that in California and the US as a whole, we're dealing with an affordability crisis. And what I like to tell my colleagues is not affordability, small a, $5 here, reduction, $5 there, reduction. It's a significant reduction. And so when we look at an affordability mandate for low-income Californians, we're looking at how do we have that access? I think Commissioner Starks talked about it, and he gave lots of anecdotes of real people who struggle with whether it's their telehealth, whether it's access to jobs, whether it's VA, appointments and any of those things. It runs the gamut. And I think, coming up on the 5-year anniversary of when you started this podcast, Drew, I think when we think about it, we all remember the kids who were trying to get in California. They were in front of Taco Bell. I think elsewhere they were in front of McDonald's, but it's California. And so we never want to see that again. And so we know we have to do something, and we know broadband, as much as this audience probably thinks broadband is one of the most interesting and fascinating things, most people, when people stop me at the grocery store, do not talk to me about broadband, right? That's not the text that I get from my mom friends back home. But broadband is this backbone of everything our economy is based on now. And if it's not affordable, those people are left out. And so that's why we're really looking at this approach. And, funding from California, it's going to be hard. There are different working groups that are looking at how do we do a funding source to replace the ACP. It is our hope that in Washington, I don't hold out a lot of hope, but, there are some Republicans who have no interest in some of these public benefit programs. There are some Republicans who know that their constituents benefit from it. So it's our hope that the ACP gets re-upped, but if the ACP doesn't get re-upped, we have to do something, and we have to protect Californians first, because, without that, we're not doing our constituents a service, and we're not doing Californians or our business environment a very good service. So I think that's kind of my top lines. I don't know if you have questions. It's my first time on your podcast, which I'm very excited about.
No, that's awesome. And you've teed up a number of important issues like, AB 353 and the New York mandate, as well as the Universal Service Fund's case before the Supreme Court just announced earlier this week. It's going to be on March 26th, I believe, the day before our conference on March 27th. So we'll come back to you with questions. Let's hear now from Yusuf, Drew, and Justin, and then we'll open up to questions. So Yusuf, take it away.
Thank you, Drew. Really appreciate it, and thanks to the audience for tuning in and having us here this afternoon here in DC with you. As Drew mentioned, I'm Yusuf Nexad, Legislative Director for Congresswoman Budzinski, based out here in the DC office. I'll go into sort of a background of how Congresswoman Budzinski got involved in the ACP space, and then offer also a little bit more of a forward-looking view of what we see on the horizon from the congressional perspective. As the commissioner mentioned, Illinois is a top 10 state for ACP recipients. Nearly 80,000 households in Illinois' 13th congressional district benefited from the program while it was active. And so it was always something that was top of mind for Congresswoman Budzinski. When we got into the FY25 NDAA and that process here in the House, the Congresswoman saw an opportunity to offer an amendment, and Commissioner Starks touched on this as well. The importance for military service members and their families to be connected, and how big ACP was for that effort. And so we submitted an amendment that basically mirrored Senator Lujan's bill text over from the Senate side to reinstate and refund the ACP through the NDAA. Unfortunately, that amendment wasn't made in order, but we built a lot of momentum with that effort. We had a bipartisan co-lead on it, Representative Mike Carey of Ohio, and then additionally built up co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. And so after the NDAA process sort of, ran its course in the House, we all regrouped and said, we have the momentum. The groups had been, the advocates had been activated by it. And we'd heard a lot of positive feedback from our constituents too, and said, why don't we try and make this a standalone effort? And so we ended up introducing the Secure and Affordable Broadband Extension Act. And for those who don't know, the bill would reinstate the ACP with some eligibility amendments in there, and then it would fulfill the funding need of rip and replace, and then pay for at least a portion of both of those with the AWS-3 spectrum auction. We were caught in the middle of a situation here where we had this really good group of bipartisan support for this bill. We kept it perfectly bipartisan. I think by the end of the Congress, we had somewhere between 20 and 22 co-sponsors, again, split evenly 50-50 among Democrats and Republicans. And each of us were really invested in seeing it through. However, we ran into an issue where, as the assembly member mentioned, we had one side of the aisle where you had some Republican members who were very, very skittish about the price tag and reinstatement of ACP, really in any respect. And then we had some of our friends on the Dem side of the aisle who were made a little skittish about any eligibility reforms and anything that's less than a wholesale reinstatement of the program as it was originally written. And so while we saw this as a pragmatic step forward, House leadership rebuffed us. The Democratic House leadership and Speaker Johnson's office decided not to bring it to the floor before the Congress ended at the end of last year. One other item from last Congress that I did want to mention too is, as you all probably know, the final version of the NDAA that was eventually signed into law by President Biden included that rip and replace funding, as well as the AWS-3 Spectrum Auction Authority to pay for the rip and replace. And so those were two sort of bargaining chips that we had kept in our back pocket to help recruit some of our Republican friends to get on the bill that are, quite frankly, no longer on the table for us anymore. So at this point, what we're looking for, sort of now in the more forward-looking sense of it, we have a new government. We have a new makeup of Congress, obviously, but I still think that there's an appetite on both sides of the aisle to make another play at this. I think what we're looking at right now is the most likely vehicle for a long-term ACP reinstatement, so we avoid some of the short-term patches and so on and so forth. Would be some sort of inclusion in bipartisan USF reform. I know that the USF working group is currently in the process of being sort of regrouping for the new Congress and planning out their priorities for the 119th and onward. But I do think the hope and the expectation is there that the USF working group really picks up where they left off from the end of last year. And I do think that's promising for the future of the program and for the bipartisan nature of it. In the interim, while the USF working group continues to do their work, I will say that the Congresswoman and our partners here in the House are very committed to using any legislative vehicle, whether that be appropriations, NDAA, any other telecom related bills that come to the House floor, and pushing the ACP as an amendment to each of those to keep the drumbeat going about how important this program is to families across the country and across our congressional district, but also to keep it sort of on the forefront for the constituents who benefit from it, and to know that Congress is still working to this end on their behalf. With that, I'll leave it there. I'll pass it back to you, Drew, and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, extremely useful background and history, and we'll come back into that after we hear from Drew and Justin briefly here. So go ahead, Drew. Tell us a little bit about how Benton and others in civil society are approaching this topic.
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone has said about the ACP and its status at the federal level, and just summarize it as it's unclear if we're going to get the a federal subsidy again. I do think a lot of us would prefer that as the optimal solution, but there are other options. I think as Assemblymember Berner is sort of contemplating with her state bill. One thing we have enough evidence, overwhelming evidence, that affordability is the #1 barrier to connectivity in the country. So Drew, I think this is a relevant panel. And I saw in the chat that there was a question about relevance, citing that the ACP numbers. I would just say that if anything, the ACP's extremely rapid growth to reach almost 1 out of 6 households in the entire country in its like nearly less than 3-year lifespan is a testament to the appetite for support with affordability. 1 out of 6 households. And bear in mind, it was targeted to households that, like, I think most of the households who use the ACP got onto the ACP because they qualify for other programs like SNAP or Medicaid. And that generally means that for a household of 1, they make about $40,000 a year. So these are not people who make a lot of money. And they took the time to go through an often pretty arduous process to do the paperwork, to get this benefit, and then to go apply it to their plan. So I think there is a lot of evidence to say that this is important. And I'll preview a study that Benton Senior Fellow John Horrigan is working on right now that sort of confirmed this and the ACP's effectiveness. John, in many of his surveys, has found that the ACP, that affordability is cited by consumers as the #1 barrier. You'll see this reflected in every single state, their BEAD and digital equity plans. All states cite affordability as the or one of the top barriers. So this is recognized across the country. So we know this is a problem we have to address. And the ACP was effective at doing it. According to John's upcoming survey, we're going to have ACP brought on about 4 million new households to the internet. And this is the larger effect in rural areas. It also addressed subscription vulnerability, which is what we term the sort of intermittent connectivity, when you can afford service 1 month, but maybe you drop the next as other bills come due. And this is sort of sporadic connectivity. It's very hard to measure at the aggregate level. But based on Benton John's analysis, about this, the ACP helped 11 million households sort of sustain that service. So together, this is about 15 million households that the ACP was keeping online, which is a remarkably high number. And then, Drew, I know we can get into this later, but beyond the federal ACP, a lot of states, notably New York, are pursuing other alternatives. Mississippi has a bill that would replicate the ACP, another sort of a subsidy program. Oregon has a bill to sort of expand their lifeline benefit and make it a little bit more generous. New York has the low cost requirement that sort of reflects the BEAD low cost requirement in their state, but it basically expands it statewide. And then every state, by virtue of their BEAD program, currently has a plan to implement a low cost option, at least in those BEAD areas where the BEAD will sort of create a local monopoly service. So we think that low cost option is very important. And Drew, I can get into the specifics of some of the state level plans and how New York might play out differently than the ACP. But I think I'll stop there for now and we can address that as we go forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm eager to get into it. So, Justin, if we're okay, just quick additional thoughts on what the commissioners, and maybe your reactions to what you've heard thus far in light of what Commissioner Starks just said, and then I've got questions for all of us here. Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go quick. 2 things real quick. Thanks, Drew, for having me. Also, I have to do the whole all the thoughts I'm going to be saying are mine. I do not speak on behalf of the commissioner of the government for this particular panel. Caveat. I'll just say real quick, I think that everything we've heard hits the point. Affordability is vitally important. We've traveled across the country. Everywhere we go, whether it's with the boss or on my own, we're talking to folks who are coming and telling us how much being online matters. And it's not always the first thing that comes to mind, like we heard before from the councilwoman, but it facilitates so many more things. We heard from folks who could get healthcare without having to spend money on an Uber by using telehealth when they couldn't get online before. We've heard from people who could get their education and could then help their other family members get online. We've heard on days like today where it's snowing in DC and my kids are upstairs and I'm working from home. Some kids can't get online to do schoolwork when they're stuck at home if they don't have access to affordable broadband. And unfortunately, I believe in one of the chatter questions, somebody highlighted how many people are eligible for ACP. And I think that's a bigger sign of the need for a program like this. There is a big difference in the haves and have-nots in this country at the moment. And the fact that so many households are eligible at the levels that Congress set is probably a sign that a program or some sort of affordability system is necessary. And as Drew and others were saying, look, you have 1 in 6, you have 23 million households signed up. That is a sign that this is really important. And that also we can improve the program if we are ever to do it again to make it easier for folks to sign up, to make it cleaner and less sticky when you're trying to enroll, so that if you don't have a piece of paper, we can figure out how to get that to you. And you heard the commissioner mention digital navigators. Programs like that are huge in getting folks online as part of any affordability program. So I know we want to get to questions. I'll stop there, but happy to talk further about this or anything else. Also want to flag, love the rip and replace highlights. This was my baby before I came up here, so really excited that we can throw that in any conversation we get.
Wonderful. All right. So the two key things I want to focus on, let's kind of have a whole discussion of it, is first is states and state dynamics, and then second is federal and both the kind of what went wrong and future options, inspired by Assemblywoman Berner and Yusuf's remarks. So Assemblywoman, what could you just speak to let's just call them two different approaches. One is require low-cost options. That's what New York has done, and it's been upheld. And you know, it certainly it's a point of contention in the industry. But New York has a requirement for every provider to have a $15 affordable broadband plan. What do you think of that approach versus the approach, as I understand it, you're taking, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it a statewide program that would kind of replicate the approach of the Affordable Connectivity program? What is the kind of the pros and cons of those two different approaches to tackling affordable broadband?
So I don't think the solution is going to be either or. I mean, I would prefer the federal government act in the interest of Americans to get everybody connected and re-up an easy to use voucher program like the ACP. That is by far what should happen. In the absence of that, I think it is imperative the states step up. And 353 is actually an affordability mandate. So it's the former, not the latter.
Oh, good.
But I don't think the former works without the latter. So we're also looking at how do we, you know, there's all sorts of funding mechanisms you can do. I'm not somebody who generally votes for taxes and fees, so I'm very mindful of who pays and why. And what I don't want to see in any subsidy program in California is that people who are just barely ineligible for ACP or affordability broadband are subsidizing the low income, which is generally what happens. It's not even, right? So how do we get at, you know, more the luxury users of broadband to help fund the basic connectivity that every Californian deserves? I think that's an interesting approach, and we're exploring that. So I think we have to do both. You have to set a rate that is affordable for households, so they are connected. You know, we don't have as many snow days as you guys do, obviously, in DC, where you're all home. You know, it's cold outside, but it's not raining in Sacramento today. And where I live in coastal San Diego, I mean, we're 68 to 72 every day. That's why we live in San Diego. And so I think we have extreme heat. We have, you know, we just have different climate impacts. You see the fires, you know, the LA fires is really consuming California and our policies, and your kids are going to be out of school for a really long time. So as climate change exacerbates and becomes more extreme, we're going to see this periodic thing where kids are going to be out of school. They have to be connected. So I think the answer is both, not either or.
Okay, what do others think about both the mandatory approach, the New York, California approach, and also statewide policies? Drew, do you want to weigh in on this first?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great approach. I think that's kind of what the ACP was contemplated to do, especially with these BEAD programs where you have the low cost requirement plus the ACP basically makes free service, which is what gets it to those very low income households who have the hardest time getting online. I will correct myself earlier too. It's $20,000 for a single family. That was a representative family for an ACP household, for an individual. $40,000 for a family of 4. I get those numbers because those are the people who came in through SNAP or Medicaid. So those are the families we're talking about for the most part. So I think
Do you know, or does anyone know, how many states have a program like California does with a subsidization on the state level for broadband? And what are the rest of you, Yosef and Justin, your thoughts on states stepping up, given that the federal government has failed to renew the Affordable Connectivity Program?
Uh,
To
I'll
go
go ahead,
ahead,
Drew.
Justin.
I was just going to
To-
say, no, I was just going to say, I think that what we're going to see is what happened in the last time the Trump administration was in charge, where the states had to step up because the federal government retreated here. And ultimately, these are such important issues that, you know, we support whatever it takes to get people online. And if the federal government's not going to do it, a lot of the comments people are posting already, we are looking at a tight financial situation in Congress. People are cutting funding instead of maybe increasing. We need to look at every opportunity possible. And if we can get the states to step up, then ultimately the means justify the ends from the outcome that we're looking for. And it's then the federal government's job, or our job, to support them however we can and try to raise awareness for these programs so that folks in these states will take advantage of them.
Tasha, what are your thoughts on that?
Is that me?
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Yeah, apologies.
Thoughts about states stepping up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry, I thought I answered that. Yes, I think we would all like to see the federal government do their job. And if they're not going to do the job, it's the responsibility of states to do the job. Because at the end of the day, it's interesting when you look at state legislatures. I talk to, assembly members or senators from other states. I represent 500,000 people. A state senator in California represents 1 million. It's a lot of people and there's a lot of need. And so I don't think, our approach in California is going to be to serve Californians however they need to be served. And I think you're seeing this not just in broadband. We're contemplating, what do we do about healthcare? What do we do about education? What do we do about higher education? I think we're seeing this across the board. But I chair communications and conveyance, which is broadband, telecommunications, autonomous vehicles, Uber, Lyft, moving companies, and because I'm fun, party buses. It's a very strange jurisdiction. But when you look at my issue area, that's the most important issue. The most important issue is, how do we make sure the underserved and the unserved remain connected so that we have the best shot at getting. I always look at it from the perspective as kids. I got elected as a PTA mom. And so how do we give our kids the best shot at a future?
Yeah.
And that's what we should be doing. And that's what this program does. That's what the affordability mandate plus some sort of subsidy for that mandate. That's what that two-pronged approach would do in California.
Yusuf, I'd love your thoughts again on statewide approaches before we turn back to the federal government question.
Yeah, of course. I just, completely align myself with Justin's remarks on this topic. I think obviously from the Congresswoman's perspective, if there's something that she can do and push forward on the congressional level, that would obviously be ideal. But in the absence of that, as we've seen sort of happen in the past, especially with states like California and Illinois, they are sort of willing and standing by to do the right thing by the citizens and constituents in the absence of federal action here.
All right, keep putting your questions in the Q&A tab. I know there's a lot. We'll get to them just now and upvote them. That helps me to kind of like pick and choose. I want to kind of turn to a bit of the political sausage making that Yusuf walked us through, and two prongs of that. One is your care that it be very bipartisan, an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And it should be noted, we put this on the description for this event, Vice President J.D. Vance was an original co-sponsor of the Affordable Connectivity Program. And you mentioned a Ohio representative who was kind of working with the representative on this. Why did that fall short, right? Why did the bipartisan push fall short? And maybe the kind of the flip side of this is like, boy, did the Democrats play their cards right on this? I mean, again, I thank you for walking us through this, but it seems like a sad story here. And I'm wondering what your kind of, and the others' thoughts are on how an issue that has a lot of salience to a lot of Democrats, but has a lot of salience to many Republicans too, doesn't get rolled. Okay, that's kind of my question.
Yeah, sure. I think from our perspective, at the end of the day, Speaker Johnson has control of the floor, and if he would have put our product on the floor last Congress, we would have had enough bipartisan support to pass it, Democrats and Republicans. I think the unfortunate thing is that he made the decision not to bring it to the floor, and I can't speak for him and his leadership team on why they chose not to do that. But I will say, I think at the end of the day, should this product have been presented on the House floor at any point last Congress, we would have had a large amount of Democrats, if not all Democrats, voting in favor, as well as those Republicans who have been friendly to the program up until this point.
Do any of the others, you have any thoughts on this point?
Yeah, I'll just add that there were a couple of bills percolating, including the ACP Extension Act, which had 232 co-sponsors in the House, 25 of whom were Republicans. So just like Yusuf said, I mean, there was strong bipartisan support. We were way past 218, needed to get through. And, sometimes things get caught up in bigger picture political battles that are beyond the esteemed panelists here. But, I think there's broad support for these programs. Every congressional district in the country had thousands of households signed up in here. And ultimately, I do think there's, even among folks who maybe dislike big picture Republican issues, there are traditionally, if you talk to the local communities and your local constituents, folks like these type of programs. That's why so many households signed up. And that's why, even if we're at a sort of a low level of support right now, other things are the priorities in Congress. I do think there's always the possibility of something happening here because so many constituents are impacted by these positive programs.
All right, let's go to questions from the most upvotes down. Jimmy Schaeffler has a great question about broadband reliability, and he asks particularly of you, Assemblywoman Berner, what do you have a feel for the costs and timing to restore broadband, especially fiber, in the destroyed areas of the Pacific Palisades and Altadena? And anything you would say to the question of rebuilding in California right now?
I mean, it's top of mind for all California legislators, regardless of if you're from LA or not. When we think about it, we think about the World Cup coming in 26. We think about the Olympics coming in 28. We think about the economic engine that is for our state and for our country. So there's that part. We also know from other fires that we've had that rebuilding is long and slow and arduous. This is probably one of our largest urban fires that we've had. So the sheer volume of households affected are really high. I don't think we have proper accurate numbers for what it means for broadband in particular. We know that a 12-mile segment of our middle mile plan was potentially affected in Pacific Palisades. And so that's something that we're looking at. I sit on our middle mile advisory committee, and we found out that information. And so we're waiting for the next hearing to find out what the impact is. But I think we could guess that all utilities have to be replaced, whether it's electricity, it's gas, it's broadband, all of them have to be replaced. And that's going to be at a cost. We know that some neighborhoods were low income, and that's going to affect people. And we know there's going to be a displacement because some people were underinsured or not insured in these areas, and how that's going to affect overall displacement in the LA area. So I think it's something we're kind of looking at as a holistic thing, but I don't think we have accurate numbers as of today.
All right, thank you. For Justin Volb, Michael Pitch asks, what is the FCC willing to do to increase competition and regulation, which we all know is the key, he says, to achieving affordability? Subsidies are not the answer, he writes. Municipal and community open access networks are at least part of the answer. Do you have any reaction to that, Justin?
Sure. Well, first thing I'll say is, we'll have to see what Chair Carr decides he wants to do on competition. It may be a different pathway than my boss and the Democrats would have preferred, but we'll support when we can and see what we can do otherwise. I think ultimately the big picture of that question is it takes a full bucket of like a kitchen sink process to get everybody connected and make sure people can afford to get connected. And so improved competition matters, but that's very expensive. And in many places, we don't have competition to the levels that we'd like to see it. You can look at the FCC's competition marketplace report or our 706 report and see, some communities have 3 or more providers, some have 1, some don't have any. That's what BEAD is working on. So we're really going to have to be looking at all things. Municipal networks are certainly an important success story in some communities where there's support for those in the communities. And we've supported them in the past. We're just going to have to look at all the solutions. And I don't think there's necessarily one pathway alone. But I do think that subsidies have proven very successful when we have done it. If you look at both Lifeline and ACP, the number of households that have been helped there, it's massive. And it's also much quicker than trying to, even if you look at BEAD, trying to build these programs to ensure that we're building out networks to folks who don't have them, while at the same time not overbuilding.
We've got a question from Shaikh Ferdas. Has there been any studies on how the anticipated end of the actual end of the ACP impact or will impact economic productivity, workplace participation, and GDP growth, given the reliance on broadband? Drew, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, there has. Benton has done them, as have many other organizations. But effectively, what we found is that just looking at the commerce effects, like the ability to find savings through online shopping and employment benefits, the ACP, I forget the exact numbers, but basically can pay for itself. And then if you factor in telehealth, government efficiency, improved education from students having better education, going on to have higher lifetime earnings. These things all add up where this is a very worthwhile investment to make sure people can have connectivity. So I can link that study in the chat.
Great. Awesome.
One other point I'll say is that the ACP had it benefited everyone, not just people who were on the program, but everyone, because it drove infrastructure. Because the fact that all these households were eligible for a benefit inspired ISPs to build infrastructure out to those areas where there was high eligibility, and then also improve service for everybody else. So it attracted the infrastructure, and that was part of its role to play with BEAD. And then I think one of the other points a commenter made, BEAD, unfortunately, in a lot of respects, those areas won't enjoy competition. Like, that's why we have BEAD. It's just, these are not financially lucrative areas to build to. And unfortunately, they're not likely to see a second entrant. So we have to, and without the ACP, there's not really much we can do to keep service affordable in those very high, very expensive areas. And that's where the low cost requirement comes into play. And I just want to remind people that is one of the key elements of BEAD that is at risk right now.
Good point, and we'll come back to that. Assemblywoman Berner has to run in about 3 minutes or so. So one last question for you, and give you a chance to make additional thoughts, Assemblywoman, is there have been a few attempts, Derek Zelkowski writes, to make in California to make internet a public utility. What do you think of this idea, and how it would affect broadband affordability? You can take that and anything else you'd like to add to our discussion before we.
Yeah, I mean, I think making something a public utility in California is quite different than other states. I'd just like to put that out there.
Okay.
We have a regulatory agency, the California Public Utilities Commission. It's constitutionally independent, that regulates monopolies. I actually have some other bills that will reform the PUC. I have an oversight hearing later this afternoon, and the PUC is not sitting a single commissioner. And it's because their commissioners do not have background in broadband or telecommunications. So I'm very concerned about making it a public utility when we don't have the CPUC correctly focused on telecommunications and broadband, generally speaking. And I don't think they really have sought the expertise and commissioners for that purpose. So I think it's a broader conversation about what the CPUC should be doing in California, what they shouldn't be doing. And if you look at our utility rates and any of the things, if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole, look at utility rates in California. There are audits, there's lots of things. It's like a different rabbit hole than what we're dealing with the ACP. But I would like to just encourage everybody in Washington to to, in as much as possible, it's often so hard as when you're elected to step out of the grind and look at who we're really helping. And I think it's been said by other panelists today and the commissioner, ACP helps Republicans and Democrats. ACP helps urban and rural. You know, you look actually in California, a lot of our, ACP went to rural areas. And that connectivity where the infrastructure is harder to build and it is more expensive is really, really critical. And we already have a quite urban rural split in California, politically, but also in terms of access. And I always put everything in the context of our kids. You know, think about a kid who's living in the high desert in California. Maybe the hospital is 4 hours away. That telehealth appointment is really, really different than somebody, say, in coastal San Diego, where we have 3 hospitals within a 30-minute drive to choose from. And lots of providers. So we just have to remember who we're serving and how we're serving it. And there are lots of ways to get to yes. And if we look for ways to get to yes, rather than reasons to say no, it's always easier to say no. But
Right.
if, people want to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work, it's really important to California and America's kids that we get to yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Best of luck in your next meeting and your efforts here, Assemblywoman.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Look forward to another time that we could do this.
We still have about 10 more minutes here, so we'll go through as many questions as we can in the remaining time, and we'll give each of you some final thoughts moments here. Brant Marsh makes the point about in the political climate, spending on most everything is being suspended or canceled. See, Doge, ACP had the support of Vance, but where is it now? Does anyone want to speak on kind of like confronting this issue? And I think probably the best reaction I have, just to put in my own 2 cents, is the savings and the benefit economically. If we can kind of link it to benefits, then it seems like an investment rather than an outflow. Justin, Yusuf, Drew, what would you add to that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think Drew flagged the importance of some of the studies that have been put out. There was another study that showed that telehealth appointments, I believe, are on average $23 cheaper than going in person. If you expand that times everybody on Medicaid and Medicare and the VA, you're talking 15, 17 billion. And so I think there is a really important argument to be made here. For some reason that didn't really catch as well, and maybe Yusuf can highlight his perspective on this when we were making these arguments before in the last Congress. And I think sometimes it's just these type of studies are really valuable when you're making the points, but push comes to shove, maybe that just doesn't resonate the same way. But yeah, I mean, we're in a situation where we're looking at a Congress that wants to limit spending, and that just makes this job even harder and means we need to push equally strong and like we said, work with the states and support anything we can by groups that are trying to make broadband affordable.
We have an additional point to jump in from Rick Uzzi about 4 out of every 10 households were eligible. And maybe this is a feature to some, but to many Republican ears, it's a bug. If 40% of Americans are eligible, how can this really be a serious program for the low income? Yusuf, how did you deal with this argument as you, faced it?
Sure. Thanks, Drew. I think one thing that we differentiated with our bill and the straight extension was some of the eligibility reforms that were included in the Lujan Vance version that we carried over to the House side, and the Budzinski Carey version too, that has explicit language on fraud, waste, and abuse that brings the income threshold back to 135% of federal poverty, like in line with other federal programs. So it was items like that helped bring the price tag down and get Republicans on board, but then B, also have some program integrity assets to it that appealed to really both sides of the aisle there.
some great questions coming in. I'll try to make them quick and short. Michael Calabrese asks, extending FCC auction authority is being considered to raise revenue as part of reconciliation. It's going to be scored between 20, scored meaning that's how much money you get from it as you goes into budget negotiations, between 20 and 60 billion. And Michael raises the point about Republicans supported spectrum auction revenue to extend ACP. You spoke about how spectrum auction revenue for the AWS got included in the RIP and Replace fund. But specifically, Michael's question is there any chance that there can be a bridge while we wrangle over long-term USF reform? Like, what is the possibility of tapping spectrum revenue for an ACP bridge, Yusuf and Justin?
I'd be more curious in my colleagues' thoughts on this, as I'm not a spectrum auction expert by any means.
Yeah, I think not good, unfortunately, Michael. I think right now, based upon what we're hearing, the Commerce Committee in the House is looking at that funding to support some of the other tax cut purposes that the administration is looking for. I do think that was something like we were talking about last, and Yusuf mentioned even trying to use that funding for RIP and Replace as well. And I just think that unfortunately that funding may be spoken for in the big picture of the plans for this upcoming Congress, but it is a nice chunk of money that, to the extent that there's a possibility there, it would be something naturally to look at.
Mike Watts raises the point about the new leadership of the FCC is big on going after the tech industry. How about going after ISPs and enforcing rate regulation as part of its 47 USC 151, dealing with reasonable charges? Just tackle the question of big tech and USF, and is there any there for using funds to go to affordable connectivity? Who wants to tackle that? Drew, go ahead, please.
Well, would that be like a USF question, like expanding contribution base as a way to
Sure.
accelerate?
Let's make it that question.
Yeah, I don't want to take any position on who contributes to USF, but I do think that one of the goals of USF reform should be to have an affordability program. Lifeline is not enough as it is right now. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I do think we should be paying attention to what these states are doing.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of states are interested. You've seen a few bills already be introduced that are approaching the New York model, but a lot more are interested in it. And the New York model is going to be very different in how it looks than the ACP for many reasons, but losing the national verifier is a big deal. Because in New York, all of these low-cost plans are bespoke to the ISP. You have each one has its own enrollment process and collects documents differently. There's no way to have a standardized digital navigator toolkit. And also there's no automation. Like with the national verifier, you could, with just the last 4 digits of your social security, you could get enrolled like that within minutes. Wasn't the case for everybody, but it was the case for a lot of people. We're not going to enjoy that benefit with these state laws. And if you look at Lifeline or even ACP as an example, if you have to submit documents at all to enroll in a program, the drop-off is enormous. It's like 5% of the people who submit documents for Lifeline end up successfully enrolling.
Wow.
So the national verifier question, like how we can do the enrollment, is a big one I think that states need to consider, and that the FCC might be able to help with, given that they already have this tool that we think needs to be explored.
Well, let's give each of you a chance to offer some closing thoughts. Maybe, if you wouldn't mind, including one more round at the state question, and in particular, your thoughts on the state mandate a la New York and California, as we've heard, but also sort of states tapping into lifeline programs of their own. What are the realistic possibilities? Mississippi was mentioned earlier in the discussion. I can't recall which of you did that, but let's hear from Justin first, and then Yusuf, and then Drew to close us out.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take maybe a stand on which state pathway is the best. I think that every state, if they're going to do it, needs to figure out what they should be doing that suits their constituents, in their particular situation. One fear that we are probably going to run into is the digital divide to have and have-nots is going to further grow between just sort of an economic have and have-not and now to a physical location have and have-not. And that doesn't help us in our big picture goal of how do we close the digital divide, because ultimately we recognize the importance of broadband and we recognize that people need to be able to have access to it, which means deploying and being able to pay for it. So that problem is still going to exist. But we are closely watching and supportive of any efforts in the states. And I think it's something where, we can help. We're happy to help give guidance to the extent we can. But, sometimes the states are really good. The states are really good at, throwing out ideas and seeing what sticks against the blackboard or the chalkboard. And in this case, this might be what we can learn from and maybe try to take it to the national perspective once we see what sticks and what's really helping communities in these individual states.
Great. Thank you for being with us, and thank Commissioner Starks for taking the time as well, Justin. Yusuf, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just echo Justin's thoughts there. I think our experience with the state of Illinois and Governor Pritzker there, they've found creative ways to backfill needs that the federal government doesn't necessarily fill all the time or hasn't, at least recently. And so anything that we can do to help coordinate and stand by and provide any support there, I think the Congresswoman is more than happy to do. And then again, I look forward to continuing to work with all of you on the federal side, on the congressional side, to help push this over the finish line and reach our goals here on ACP reinstatement.
Well, and thank you, and please thank the Congresswoman as well for her engagement on these issues. We've had a very government civil society focused panel. We obviously try to get a variety of viewpoints on lots of different discussions and lots of events, and we may not have had the private sector, but we'll get them in future discussions because they play a very important role too. Drew, closing thoughts for us all.
Yeah, I have to note for the private sector that a lot of them are in New York meeting the requirement. And they were meeting it beforehand and are continuing to meet it now. So they do offer those low-cost plans. The one thing I'd say for states is that every state has already undergone this question to a certain extent when defining its BEAD low-cost requirement.
Right.
Generally speaking, those plans are between $30 to $75. Often there's like $30 requirement with a waiver up to $75, broadly speaking. So I think that is a good place to start looking. Like, this is what states have identified we think is reasonable in terms of cost and for ISPs. Unfortunately, those plans are only available in tiny little sections of the state, very rural BEAD areas. So I wonder if states are going to consider, like, if we should make these plans available to other people, similar to what New York did, similar to what other states are considering. That's what I'll be looking for.
All right. Before we just thank our panelists, I want to remind you that we are here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Next week, we're going to be talking about the new convergence, fiber and wireless, particularly the integration of fiber backhaul and wireless infrastructure. The week following, February 26th, we'll be talking about copper theft and broadband vandalism, an interesting, topic that's risen in importance recently. And then on March 5th, we're going to be talking about the future of data centers. And that is in some ways a preview for our in-person event on March 27th, Data Centers, Nuclear Power, and Broadband. On behalf of all of our panelists, including Commissioner Starks and Assemblywoman Berner, who have had to leave, Justin, Drew, Yusuf, thank you for being with us. I'm Drew Clark, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care.